So, I've been watching a lot of useful charts, forgotten weapons, Grand Thumb, and modern tactical shooting recently, and for whatever reason, I decided to subject myself to the frustration that comes with in-depth research about a topic that you think you know a lot about, only to realize that everything is way more complicated than you think. If you clicked on this video, then you know what we're looking at today, and so you'll see what was so frustrating about all of this for me. The AR-15 behind the AK-47 is the most well-known rifle in the world. I don't think that's a particularly controversial statement, but as it turns out, there are a lot of AR-15s and M16s and M4s and all of that fun stuff, so I decided to make a family tree to map out all the variants of the AR-15 and the wider AR family, starting in the 1950s and working down to the modern day. This hodgepodge of lines and rifles that look identical may be confusing, and I'll start to explain it in a second, but first, remember to like, comment, and subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more content. Covering a topic like this and saying the naughty word will probably not do this video or the channel at large any favors with the YouTube algorithm, so doing those things helps me out a lot. Thank you so much if you just did any of those things. So this series will actually be 5 videos long, at least that's the plan right now. It will look at the various branches of the family. This video will be looking at the main line of Armalite rifles that were produced by Armalite from the 1950s on, mostly focusing on the 3 Armalite rifles. The other videos will look at the AR-15/M16 family of full-length rifles produced by Colt, then the AR-15 carbine families, namely the CAR-15s and M4s, and the foreign variants, namely from Colt Canada as well as other European and Asian companies, and a final video just kind of putting the whole thing together. So today we'll be looking at the guns produced by Armalite, as well as some background history on the company, Eugene Stoner, the engineer who of course pioneered this whole thing, and some guns that came about before this family of rifles. So first things first, what rifles will we actually be looking at in the series and what will be excluded? With this tree, I've tried to keep it faithful to the original AR and AR-15 design and production. Pretty much what I mean is that AR-15 clone guns will not be included in this tree. So any company that makes a gun like the AR-15 but isn't actually the AR-15 or a licensed production or one of the other AR guns won't be covered. Everything from Daniel Defense, Anderson, Remington, Bravo, Palmetto State, Arrow, Savage, just take your pick, not going to be in this video. This tree looks at Armalite and Colt guns as well as the foreign companies that produced licensed variants commercially. And if you're confused on why Colt is included, we'll get to that later, especially in the later videos. I will also be excluding guns made by Armalite or Colt that are not select fire or semi-auto rifles. That being said, I do actually get a bit into them here, but they're not officially on the family tree. To further simplify things, I won't be including all the civilian variants of these guns, and I will mostly focus on commercial or military select fire guns, although in this video there are going to be some civilian variants. Clone guns will also be excluded, like the Colt 639, for example, which is identical to the 629, except that it was exported. I also won't be looking at prototype guns. In short, this is a attempt at being a thorough yet simplified at the same time family tree. So let's take a look at Armalite itself. Armalite was actually created as a subsidiary company of Fairchild, which was an aerospace company founded in the 1920s. Fairchild, being in the field that it was in, specialized in ultra-light materials like, fiberglass and polymers and aluminum and titanium, a field that was booming after the World Wars. The idea to use these materials in building guns was actually inspired in Germany to some degree, and the concept spread to America via some high-level military men who knew a man named George Sullivan. Legally Armed America has a good video on this, he made a part 1 to the history of the AR-15 and has not made a part 2 since, so go check that out if you want more info on the details and early stuff of the AR-15 and its selection process. Anyway, Sullivan was a patent attorney and actually worked with Lockheed Martin, not with Fairchild, but eventually he brought the lightweight rifle idea to Richard Boutelet, who was the head of Fairchild. Boutelet, I'm sure I'm saying his name right, gave Sullivan funding to start a small-scale gunsmithing shop in California, which may have happened in 1952. It is pretty hard to say, I can't actually find a hard date. And Fairchild officially bought this shop and Armalite in 1954. Fairchild's Pegasus design was married to a crosshair to make the famous emblem that a lot of us know today. Also in 1954, Eugene Stoner joined the company as chief engineer and brought some of his prior designs with him, forming the basis of the first few AR guns. A lot of these guns were actually designed before 1954, but Armalite then created a few of them in very small numbers, or prototyped them and just made drawings of them, and therefore they got AR designations. The AR-1, for example, was a bolt-action Mauser system para-sniper rifle that used a fiberglass foam-filled stock and an aluminum barrel. However, the gun had some, so no one ever picked it up. I wasn't able to find info on all the ARs ever made, and most designations actually never went beyond prototype stage, but here are some of the guns I was able to learn about, and again, most of these are not really going to be on the family tree, this is just bonus content. The AR-3 was a gun that attempted to compete with the M14 and FNFAL, chambered in 7.62, but with a similar stock design to the AR-1 with ultra-lightweight components. The AR-5 was a bolt-action .22 survival rifle meant to be stored and disassembled in its own stock, and the Air Force actually adopted this in limited quantity for pilots and dubbed it the MA-1. The AR-7, a semi-auto version, would then see production and was Armalite's first gun to hit the commercial market. And the AR-8 was an experimental semi-auto shotgun design that went nowhere. None of these guns except the AR-7 would actually see any success or real sales, but that would change in 1956. In this year, Stoner invented the rifle that put Armalite on the map, the AR-10, the first rifle in our family tree. Chambered in 7.62, the AR-10 was a select-fire rifle that attempted to unify the power of the NATO-style cartridge with the weight and size of a smaller rifle, like the AK-47 for example. Looking at it, we see that it is quite similar to the AR-15 that we know of today, but with some key differences. Besides the cartridge, the AR-10 had a trigger-shaped charging handle that ran under the carrying handle on top. The furniture would also often be some sort of fake wood laminate or Bakelite rather than the black polymer that is so ubiquitous on the AR-15, along with aluminum for most of the body and low-intensity pieces, and early versions used a steel aluminum alloy in the barrel. We can see where that one's going. All of this made for a smooth-shooting, controllable, easily portable gun that was similar in stopping power to its European counterparts. Armalite attempted to submit the AR-10 for consideration as the US Army's new issue rifle in 1956, but a mix of the trials already nearing their conclusion, as well as a catastrophic barrel explosion,
it is even funnier the second time,
quickly excluded the rifle from further consideration. This is often looked at by gun historians as one of the major blunders in military arms history, given the imminent failure of the M14 and the long-standing stopping power debate between calibers. The AR-10 had failed in the US, but a Dutch company by the name of Artillerie Inrichtingen, I'm sure that's the exact way you pronounce it, or AI, was given license to produce the gun for 5 years in 1957, and the rifle had more success there, which we'll cover in the foreign variant video. Also worth noting here that it was always Armalite's intention to sell their designs to other groups, The company didn't plan on making infrastructure and machine plants to mass produce their weapons. They were mostly content with designing something and then selling the rights to it to a more established company who would actually make it. Anyways, in the States, hope was on the horizon for Armalite. Soon after these tests, the military decided that the 7.62 was a stupid caliber and they wanted to experiment with weapons that were of a smaller caliber. Again, I won't go too deep into this history, and Legally Armed America has a good video talking about all this stuff. But basically, the Army wanted Armalite to downsize the AR-10 to a smaller 22 caliber rifle. This started in 1957, and the AR-15 was born. This gun, of course, looks quite different from what we're used to seeing today, most notably the color of the furniture and the topside charging handle. This is literally just a scaled down AR-10. I'll go more in depth about the early development of the gun in the next video, since the AR-15 that we'd recognize today really started under Colt. You'll notice I mentioned that the Army wanted a 22 rifle, but just understand that this means a bullet that was around 0.22 inches in diameter, not a 22 LR round that we think of today. The original chambering for the AR-15 was a round called 222 Special, but it was actually identical to what we know today as the 223 Remington. And no, I have no idea why they got that changed in the last hundredth of an inch. I don't know, maybe they had bad rulers back then or something. So Armalite submits the AR-15 for this small caliber program, and the gun actually had to use different ammo since one of the other submissions wasn't compatible with the AR's round and they wanted to standardize the ammo. This, coupled with the testers trying to remove the front sight and in the process screwing up the gas system, hurt the rifle's chances. But it didn't matter anyway, because while the Army wanted a better system, the M14 program was selected and the process was too far along to abandon, so the AR-15 and the wider small caliber idea went to the wayside. It was around this time in 1959 that Armalite pretty much gave up hope. In a bid to get some money, Armalite sold the rights to the AR-10 and AR-15 as well as their shared gas system to Colt's Manufacturing. And as it turns out, the company was officially called Colt's, as in Colt's Manufacturing, with the apostrophe S, but everyone, including the logo, just calls it Colt. Where the rifle goes from there will be covered in the next video. Now, of course, Armalite was in dire straits. Its main rifles were fully sold to a new company, and Eugene Stoner, the chief engineer who had all the cool ideas, left as well. The company experimented with some more weapons that failed to get past the early stages, some of which actually came between the AR-10 and AR-15. The AR-11 was a downsized version of the AR-3 and chambered in that same 222 round, and was a possible competitor to the AR-15. The AR-12 was essentially an AR-10 with a piston system, and the AR-16 was similar to that. The AR-13 was an attempt at an aircraft weapon, and the AR-14 was a semi-auto hunting rifle design. Armalite finally made a design that they actually sold with the AR-17, which was, you guessed it, a gold-colored ultra-lightweight semi-auto 2-shot shotgun.
Buy a shotgun.
That didn't go too well, but Armalite finally got a good idea in 1963. This new gun, the AR-18, actually looks quite like the AR-16, minus the wooden furniture, and was its spiritual successor. Since Stoner's gas system design was taken, the company had to think of something new. In its place, they developed a short-stroke gas piston system, where pretty much the siphoned off gas just hits a long piston, and that actually moves the bolt carrier group backwards. To replace the buffer tube in the stock, 2 buffer springs ran inside the receiver over the bolt carrier group, allowing for the still polymer stock to actually fold. The AR-18 also had a reciprocating charging handle and was chambered in 5.56 like its AR-15 cousin. The barrel was also slightly shorter at 18.25 inches. Many parts of the gun, instead of being made from milled aluminum, were made from stamped metal, making the gun very cheap and easy to produce in an effort to sell the rifle to lesser military powers. Very limited runs of the gun were sold to various countries, namely Botswana, Swaziland, Haiti, Malaysia, and Nigeria, but sadly, the rifle didn't find any real success commercially. The US and UK both tested this weapon as well, but neither saw the weapon as something to really be adopted. That being said, the AR-18 had a couple notable variants, the most notable being the AR-180, which was a civilian variant of the rifle. Minor changes that came to the gun also depended on where it was produced. After domestic production in California, the gun was then licensed to Howa Machining in Japan, and later Sterling in the UK. The only differences here lie between the Sterling and Howa variants, with the Japanese guns having different finish and a 180-degree safety switch as opposed to the more conventional 90-degree design. Howa had to stop producing the guns, of course, because of Japanese export restrictions on selling guns to countries at war, even though it was an American company licensing the guns to a Japanese company to then get back its own guns to sell in its own country. But after that, the production moved to the UK, where most of the guns and variants were made. Here we have variants from both the 18 and the 180. On the civilian front, a sharpshooter variant was produced with neoprene coating on the furniture and a cheek rest on the gun. The short-lived AR-180 SCS replaced the rear furniture with a wooden thumbhole stock and also got rid of the dust cover. Don't know why. More interestingly, on the military side, another short-lived variant known as the AR-18S was produced, which had a 10.1-inch barrel and a more trumpeted flash hider. A foregrip was also attached to some versions, which was unique in an era where modularity was very limited. Sadly, none of these guns were really popular, and only the AR-180 civilian variants showed any promise on the American market. This sadly was not enough to revitalize this company, however, and it essentially ceased operations by the late 70s and was sold to Alisco Tool Company in the Philippines in 1983, and after a brief idea to produce AR-100 rifle series, the company dissolved and Armalite was sort of in limbo. But not all was lost. While it probably gave the company bad press and didn't help sales, the AR-180 found a life not too far from where the gun was produced. Through the late 60s and especially the early 70s, the IRA fought a guerrilla war in Northern Ireland known as the Troubles, and the AR-180 was their most popular and recognizable weapon. They even made a song about it.
And a clip of ammunition for me little Armalite.
But if ethnic conflict in Europe isn't enough to lift your spirits about Armalite, the company actually made a comeback in 1996 when it was purchased by the former General Mark Westrom and his Eagle Arms company. I won't go into too much detail here with production after this point, but here are some of the highlights. The company produced the AR-10B, which had variants that came out with the AR-15 style controls as well as retro versions more like the original AR-10. The most interesting part of this design was that it used old modified M14 magazines, since it came about during the assault weapons ban in America, which prevented production of new high-capacity magazines. This was later replaced by the AR-10A in 2006, and the reason they went in that order is that 10A was conceived of in the 50s but never went anywhere, so they just skipped to B, and then they changed their mind. The 10A has some minor upgrades, but since we're mostly focusing on military variants for the family tree, I won't look too much into it. The other two main developments that are rifle related are the AR-19 and the M15, the former being a 9mm PDW style pistol, and the M15 just being a modern AR-15. Armalite has yet to produce any weapons for real military consideration, at least as far as I know, although I would note that they produced a 50 cal sniper called the AR-20 and then became the AR-50 because it's cooler, and a couple of pistols, the AR-24 and 26, both of which are discontinued. Today, Armalite only sells a few types of guns, the AR-19, the AR-50, and variants of the AR-10 and M15 rifles. The history of Armalite is a complex and often quite sad and unlucky story. It was one of the most innovative companies in firearms history, and of course created the most popular rifle in the West that would go on to inspire many types of guns. Besides the endless AR-15 variants, the AR-18 bolt system would actually go on to be extremely popular as well. This isn't a full list, but here are some of the rifles that use an AR-18 system. The G36, FX05, MCX, LA85, XM8, SAR-80, Tavor, and the SCAR. A quick way to tell is if the gun has a folding stock, and of course if some of it's a bullpup, and it isn't a Kalashnikov, it probably uses an AR-18 system. So that's it for this video, everyone. I know we really only covered 3 rifles in depth here. The next videos are going to be the complete opposite. It's going to be a crap ton of rifles with not as much depth. Until then, remember to like, comment, and subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more content. Hope you all are doing great, and I will see you all in the next video. Goodbye.